passengers via computer and identify potential threats is behind schedule, and most cargo shipped on passenger planes is not physically inspected at the airport.
If we leave one area open, we leave one area available to the terrorists, they will go down the path of the easiest or least resistance. So whatever we apply on one side of the industry has to be applied to the other side of the industry as well.
30% of air cargo moves in the belly of passenger planes, and right now the government doesn't have machines that can x-ray it.
We're physically incapable. We don't have the infrastructure or the technology to keep the air cargo industry moving and screen every single piece. It's not feasible at this time, but what is feasible and what is necessary is that we identify all of the high-risk cargo and make sure that that's being screened.
Moving cargo is a $4 billion a year business to passenger airlines. They say 100% physical inspection would destroy the business.
It would require sort of hand searching each and every piece, and if we hand search each and every piece, that'll effectively knock out the whole business of cargo carried on passenger aircraft.
The airline industry argues that cargo shipped by air is more closely monitored than cargo shipped on trucks, trains, or on ships in this country. There is likely some confusion ahead in air security because the TSA will soon lose its total control of passenger screening. Come November, airports can begin hiring their own screeners if they want, and 1 in 4 airports, that's about 100 airports, has indicated they will do so. Luke?
Concerning, to say the least.
Sure is.
Peter Biles, thank you. My next guest says there are huge gaps in security at our nation's airports. Congressman David Obey of Wisconsin says there is certainly not enough funding being allocated for security at this country's airports, and he says an even more pressing problem is the lack of security at our ports and our railroads. Congressman David Obey joins me tonight from Green Bay, Wisconsin. Good to have you with us, Congressman.
Good to be with you, Lou.
Hey, here we are approaching 3 years after September 11th, and that there should be any gaps at all in security, I think must strike many viewers, many Americans, as just simply incomprehensible. Why should there be any slack whatsoever in meeting the goals to provide maximum security at our ports, in our transit, and certainly at our airports?
Well, we can never have 100% safety in any field of endeavor, but the fact is that I think we've been virtually negligent in refusing to fully fund some of the initiatives that could have increased safety at our ports, at our airports, on our borders. I just think that the Congress and the President have been woefully inadequate on this whole issue.
The Homeland Security's appropriations bill for the next fiscal year provides, as you well know, almost $6 billion in funding for, among other things, air marshals, federal air marshals. Is that, in your judgment, an adequate amount?
Absolutely not. I think the public would be surprised to find out that the number of air marshals actually in service today are almost 20% less than the amount the President said would be necessary just 2 years ago. I think they would also be shocked if they understood what a small percentage of cargo on passenger planes is actually inspected for explosives. For every person who walks through a screening device in an airport, there are about 600 pounds of cargo that go on airplanes. And the vast majority of it is not screened. We also need, in my view, to invest $2 to $3 billion in additional in-line equipment so that you can have cargo that goes on the. I mean, said you can have luggage that goes onto planes screened so that people know that you're getting good, solid inspection. We just aren't getting it right now.
You're the ranking Democrat on the House Appropriations Committee. What are, in your judgment, the 3 most critical additions and initiatives that we should be following right now?
Well, I would certainly try to see to it that we're inspecting much more of the cargo that goes on airplanes. I would also try to make certain that the air marshals are funded at a higher level so that you can have enough of them. And also, this doesn't relate to air security so much, but I would certainly see to it that we add 2,000 people to the inspection teams at our borders. Right now, we are 2,000 people below the number that the Patriot Act itself, which the President talks about often, we're 2,000 AIM personnel below the amount that we're supposed to have under the Patriot Act. In addition, in ports, it is ludicrous for us to be having inspectors in foreign ports who are only on temporary duty and rotate every 6 months. No, they are not going to get to know the system and get to know the people in those foreign ports.
And Congressman,
having a tremendous number of holes.
And Congressman, one final question, and that, of course, on Accenture, the Homeland Security contract, it could be as much as $10 billion awarded to a foreign-based company, blocked by the Appropriations Committee this week. Now it goes to a vote of the House. What is your sense? Will that vote in the Appropriations Committee, a bipartisan vote, by the way, be sustained?
Well, I hope we have a vote in the House. Last year, we added an amendment to prevent a company which locates in Bermuda from being able to get Homeland Security contracts. But that was then knocked out by the Rules Committee, and the House never even got a chance to vote on it. I hope that enough pressure is put on the Rules Committee this year so that they will allow that language to stay in the bill, or at least make certain that we can get a vote on it. It's absurd when we give to a company that is locating in Bermuda to escape taxes the biggest contract ever given by this agency for the purpose of tracking who crosses our borders. When the company itself has walked away from the border, I don't think that they deserve to be checking on other people walking away or walking across that border.
Thank you very much, Congressman David O. We thank you for being with us this evening.
Thank you.
When we continue, presidential historian Robert Dallek joins us for more on President Reagan's legacy, including his impact on the power of the 21st century presidency. Also tonight, the latest opinion poll, bad news for President Bush, that story and a great deal more. We'll be discussing that with some of the country's top political journalists, and Congress preparing to tackle the exporting of American jobs and a number of other critically important issues in the coming days. We'll take a look at the week ahead. Next, stay with us.
Dobbs Tonight is brought to you by Fidelity Investments. Stop by your local Fidelity Investor Center today. And by the Royal Bank of Scotland Group. Make it happen. Dobbs Tonight continues. Here now for more news, debate, and opinion. Dobbs.
The U.S. government made a mistake, and a big one. The State Department now says a recent report showing a decline in terrorism in 2003 was based on faulty data. In fact, spokesman Richard Boucher says the corrected State Department report will show a sharp increase in terrorism last year. The State Department says the corrected version is not yet completed. Republican Senator John McCain has apparently rejected an offer to form a bipartisan alliance against President Bush with none other than Senator John Kerry. According to the Associated Press, Senator Kerry has asked McCain to consider running with him. Campaign officials say Kerry stopped just short of offering McCain the job. And according to the latest Los Angeles Times poll, Senator Kerry is doing just fine without Senator McCain. The poll shows Senator Kerry leading President Bush now nationally by a 51 to 44% margin. And Senator Kerry is still ahead of President Bush in the poll when Ralph Nader is added 48% to 42%. Joining me now to talk about this and a great deal more in the way of political events this week, tonight's newsmakers, Jim Ellis, Chief of Correspondence at Business Week, Roger Simon, Political Editor at U.S. News and World Report, Karen Tumulty, National Political Correspondent, Time Magazine. We have had an extraordinary week, this outpouring of affection, the national display. Karen, I'm going to turn to you. What are is there in this any surprise for you at just the obvious affection for President Reagan?
Well, the only surprise was for my part, is the amount of coverage, the saturation of coverage, and the degree to which it essentially smothered all other news. I think it did show that this president, still has a real hold on the American people and on the political debate.
And Roger, your thoughts?
I think Karen's right. This is the first president, and a popular president at that, who has died since the creation of the 24-hour news cycle, since the rise of cable news that fills the airwaves hour after hour after hour. And it was filled with Ronald Reagan, and I think broadcasters sense that people wanted it, and it did become the only story, and it has really suppressed, for the first time, any talk about the presidential race for at least a week.
Well, some of the news that was not lost in the week, Jim, a president who won remarkable successes at both the United Nations and the G8 summit, a unanimous resolution in support of Iraq. At the G8 summit, the solidarity that we haven't seen for some time. Your thoughts?
Well, I agree that a lot of people thought we would never get the UN resolution through, particularly with that level of support. But we have to remember that we've got a lot of people who are saying, yeah, we're behind you now, but they don't still want to put up additional funding, and they don't want to give us men to help us actually stabilize the situation there. So I think that while a lot of the public attention's been on the Reagan funeral this week, I think that next week we'll start looking back at what we really got out of the UN, and particularly what we got out of the G8, which is that, okay, we're going to legitimize the government there, but we're not willing to actually throw any more world support behind it. And more importantly, there's no role for NATO there, and you guys are still pretty well on your own.
Karen, do you agree with that?
Well, I think there are a couple of intangible benefits, however, that came through. One is this UN resolution does at least put some sort of international stamp of approval on this new government in Iraq, which I think would otherwise be questioned as essentially a tool of the American occupation, especially considering the number of members who are actually carryovers from the provisional government now. And second of all, I think President Bush benefits politically from sort of proving that he can perform both at the G8 and at the UN on the world stage as a member of an ensemble cast. That diplomacy seems to have come back into favor.
And this poll, Roger Simon, showing Senator Kerry running well ahead of President Bush with or without consideration of Ralph Nader. Are you surprised?
I'm surprised at the margin. 7 points is a lot. And it's the first time that Kerry has broken out of virtually a dead heat. And it puts to rest the storyline, at least for a little while. These poll numbers will shift between now and November. It puts to rest the storyline that even though Bush has been dropping in approval, John Kerry simply can't capitalize it, can't make the horse race numbers move. He has made the horse race numbers move, and the most depressing for the White House probably is the fact that the poll shows that by solid majorities, the American people reject the president's handling of the economy and Iraq at a time when the economy is getting better, and there seems to be some hope in Iraq.
Although, Lou, there are questions being raised about that poll, especially it's been followed since then by an Associated Press poll that shows the race basically even. The president's campaign immediately pointed out that in this poll, the president enjoys a very strong lead among Republicans, a stronger lead than Kerry has among Democrats, that independents are breaking in favor of the president. So they are saying that it's, practically a mathematical impossibility for this margin to look the way it does, that there was a sampling error in it.
What do you think of that sampling error, John?
Well, I think that it's probably too soon to say that either side has this thing I don't think we've seen a Kerry breakout yet. I really do think that because the economy is, in the aggregate, getting better, that plays to the president. Also, as we start getting more jobs numbers out there, jobs are being created. And so the Democrats, if they have any chance of capitalizing on the jobs issue in the future, are going to have to start talking about the quality of jobs that's out there as opposed to the number. In other words, the quality of jobs and the level of pay that those jobs have. That will be the new sort of message we'll get from them.
Jim Ellis, thank you very much. Business Week Magazine, Karen Tumulty, Time, Roger Simon, U.S. News and World Report. We thank you. Have a good weekend. That brings us to the subject of tonight's poll. The question, have you decided whom you will vote for in the presidential election? Yes or no? Let's find out just who's undecided. Cast your vote at CNN.com/Lou. We'll have the results for you later in the broadcast. Coming up next, a true American hero, a Marine wounded in combat who says he would rather be back with his fellow Marines than home recovering. We'll have his story coming up next. And the nation says farewell to the 40th President of the United States. Leaders from around the world gather to honor the late President Ronald Reagan. Presidential historian Robert Dowling joins us, along with Wolf Blitzer and Judy Woodruff.
Newsmakers is brought to you by UBS, a global financial firm with the heart and soul of a two-person organization, you and us.
This week, extraordinary in Washington. Next week will at least be busy on Capitol Hill. Congress will take up a number of controversial issues, including the $10 billion Homeland Security contract that was awarded to Bermuda-based Accenture, the contract part of the Homeland Security Appropriations Bill. That's just one of several key items on the legislative agenda next week. Lisa Sylvester has more for us now from Washington, D.C. Lisa.
Lou, this week was unusual. There was no partisan bickering. Everyone was getting along, pausing to remember President Ronald Reagan. But all it takes is one or two divisive issues for both parties to be their usual selves again. Topping the list for next week is the corporate tax bill in the House. This bill repeals a $50 billion tax break that the World Trade Organization prohibited and replaces it with $140 billion in tax cuts for manufacturers. Critics say this bill does not do enough for small American manufacturers, and they argue the big winners here are really large corporations. Also on the House side is the Homeland Security Department Appropriations Bill. It's tentatively scheduled to head to the Rules Committee next week. An amendment to the bill would prevent companies that set up shell corporations outside the United States from receiving contracts. And as was mentioned earlier in the program, last week Accenture, based in Bermuda, was awarded a contract up to $10 billion by the Department of Homeland Security. Other items briefly, the energy bill also will be taken up by the Senate. With gasoline prices topping $2 a gallon, Republican members of the House hope to pressure the Senate to act on the bill before the summer recess. And on the Senate side, lawmakers will be debating the defense reauthorization bill. Part of that debate will include whether to increase President Bush's request of $25 billion for the war in Iraq. Some Democrats say, though, if the administration needs more money, it should just ask for it now. Lou?
And one doesn't hesitate to think that they will ask for it. Lisa Sylvester, thank you very much. Taking a look now at some of your thoughts, we've received a great deal of viewer email about that multi-billion-dollar contract awarded to Accenture. Cassandra Drockenberg of Ector, Texas. Thank you for your continued coverage of the Accenture debacle. It's outrageous that this government continues to abandon the American worker. Gray Van Ness of Green Bay, Wisconsin, keep up your excellent reporting on the loss of our jobs to foreign countries and the offshoring of corporate interests to cut taxes owed here. Why is our government not looking out for the workers of our country? Does the almighty buck conquer decency, patriotism, and the courage to do what is right? Rich Bakke of Simi Valley, California. It is a sad statement regarding the lack of integrity and support that our elected officials exhibit for the very people that elected them and are paid to represent. Send us your thoughts at LouDobbs@CNN.com. Still ahead here, a tribute to two great Americans and heroes tonight. The remarkable story of a Marine wounded in Iraq who says he can't wait to return to battle. We'll bring you his story in just a moment. Please stay with us.
Heroes, brought to you by the Royal Bank of Scotland Group. Make it happen.
In Heroes tonight, a Marine gunnery sergeant who volunteered for 2 tours of duty in Iraq. Sergeant Nick Popovich was wounded. He's now home recovering from his combat injuries, but he plans to return to Iraq just as soon as he can, or as soon as the Marine Corps allows him. Casey Wyan has his story from 29 Palms, California.
Gunny Nick Popovich is doing what he loves best, showing off an M1A1 battle tank, the kind he's commanded through 2 Gulf Wars.
There is no weapon system in Iraq currently employed by the anti-coalition forces that can take this thing off the battlefield.
Popovich rolled into Baghdad's Firdos Square on a tank he named Carnivore. He and his fellow Marines helped the Iraqis take down the now infamous statue of Saddam Hussein.
you really felt at that time you were seeing these people liberated, these people were being freed, and they certainly were reacting that way. And it was just an incredible moment to be part of.
Popovich completed the deployment and came home, but just a few months later volunteered to go back with another unit.
I'm a Marine. If Marines are off fighting somewhere, I don't want to be home watching on TV. I want to be there. I want to be with them. I want to be part of it.
This time he found himself in Fallujah in a tough firefight with insurgents. A rocket-propelled grenade almost cost him his life.
The other one came from straight down above me and hit me right on top of the head, right about here. I guess my head was...
The explosion took out Popovich's right eye, left him partially blind in his left eye and deaf.
There's like a cap in there. I don't know if this is gross or not. It's not gross to me or anybody, but there's just a cap in there.
Popovich can't read yet, but says his sight gets better every day. He can't hear with one ear and hopes a hearing aid will help the other. In spite of the ordeal, he feels lucky.
It never struck me as a tragedy or anything like that because, I was perfectly fine from the neck down. I'm perfectly healthy.
While he recovers, Popovich hangs out with fellow Marines in the tank maintenance yard, anxious to get back to work.
I'd go back in a minute. As soon as I can see again, that's my plan.
And he hopes his 15-year military career will continue. Casey Wyan, CNN, reporting.
Okay.
And our thought tonight is on heroes. Heroism is the divine relation which in all times unites a great man to other men. Scottish writer and historian Thomas Carlyle. Coming up next, the nation bids farewell to President Ronald Reagan. Presidential historian Robert Dallek will join me, along with Wolf Blitzer and Judy Woodruff. Stay with us. A political defense of President Bush coming from an unlikely source, Russian President Vladimir Putin. Putin defended President Bush against criticism from Democrats over the war in Iraq. Putin, answering reporters' questions at the G8 summit in Sea Island, Georgia, said Democrats have, quote, no moral right to attack the president over Iraq, end quote. President Putin reminded reporters it was President Clinton who authorized the 1999 bombing of Yugoslavia by U.S. and NATO forces. Russia opposed both the Yugoslav bombing and, of course, the war in Iraq. Returning now to our top story, the nation's final farewell to President Ronald Reagan. Joining me now from Washington, CNN's Wolf Blitzer and Judy Woodruff, who've been leading our coverage. And in Washington, presidential historian Robert Dallek, the author of numerous books on presidents, including Ronald Reagan, The Politics of Symbolism. Bob, before I bring in my colleagues who've done just such an outstanding job this week, let me ask you this. The essential question at the end of this week of mourning, this National Day of Mourning, is it, in your judgment, and I know it's early, but is it, in your judgment, too soon to say that Ronald Reagan will go down as one of the most important presidents?
Well, Lou, I think there's no question he'll be remembered as one of the most significant presidents in the country's history, and particularly in the 20th century. You know, Lou, there have only been 12 presidents out of the 43 so far who had 8 years or more in office. The more, of course, was FDR. And that's pretty thin group, or a pretty limited group to be a part of, and so that alone makes him a major significant president. And I think historians will be looking at his records and studying his work and his administration, his leadership for years and years to come. You know, we're only 15 years away from his presidency, and the bulk of his papers have not opened yet. And so historians in the next 15, 20 years are really going to dig in, and biographers and historians are going to have a field day, so to speak. And I think we're going to see an awful lot of books about Ronald Reagan's 8 years in the presidency in the next 15, 20 years.
Judy, I would ask both you and Wolf, as you have been reporting on this week of mourning for our 40th president, to think back in your coverage of presidents, remember and recall your coverage of this President Ronald Reagan, and give us your best sense. They say that news is history's first draft. No offense, Robert Dallek. But in the first draft, your thoughts, your reactions, your personal thoughts. Judy?
Well, it has just been an extraordinary week. I mean, it has been, and this has been...
Years in the presidency in the next 15, 20 years.
Judy, I would ask both you and Wolf, as you have been reporting on this week of mourning for our 40th president, to think back in your coverage of presidents, remember and recall your coverage of this President Ronald Reagan. And give us just your best sense. They say that news is history's first draft. No offense, Robert Dallek. But in the first draft, your thoughts, your reactions, your personal thoughts. Judy?
Well, it has just been an extraordinary week. I mean, it has been, and this has been said over and over again, it's the first time in 30 years that we have had a state funeral for a president, where we've seen the sort of pomp and circumstance that we've had all week. You know, you've had both the majesty of today's service at the National Cathedral here in Washington and the very emotional, if you will, the scene of the caisson coming down Pennsylvania, or rather Constitution Avenue on Wednesday, combined with the very personal scenes with Nancy Reagan. So it's brought together the state, the pomp, but it's also brought the personal, all in one in a 6-day period. And I think it's also been a time to bring Americans together. If only for a few days, it's brought us together.
And one point I'd add, Lou, is that as much as these are icons and these are famous people, Ronald Reagan, of course, the President of the United States, what we saw also are that these are human beings who are left in the aftermath. Nancy Reagan, a wife who so deeply loved her husband, now in mourning, and the children, of course, in mourning as well. And others are human beings, like the former president, the first president, Bush, when he choked up today as he was delivering that eulogy, and he became so sentimental about the man he served for 8 years as vice president. That was just a human moment that all of us could appreciate.
And Bob Dallek, that's really part of the motivation for this pomp and circumstance, as Judy referred to it, as the nation remembers a president now going to his final resting place in California. The nation attaches to the symbolism that you've spoken of in all of this.
Yes. Well, you know, Reagan is a powerful symbolic figure, most of all because, as Judy was saying, he's a unifying force. And I think I've been saying there's been so much acrimony in our politics in recent years. You remember back to the election of 2000 and now the current election campaign. It's so divisive. And Reagan sort of inspirits the nation, gives it a feeling that it has shared values and a better future.
A reminder that we can be united, and we appreciate all of you being here. Again, Judy Woodruff, Wolf Blitzer, just outstanding work this week. We thank you very much. And Robert Dallek, we thank you very much for your time and sharing your thoughts. Turning now to the results of our poll, only 4% of you responded that you have not decided whom you will vote for in this presidential election. And the undecideds narrowing significantly, at least among this audience, this very demanding and intelligent audience of this broadcast. We thank you for voting. Still add, paying tribute to a friend, the special relationship between President Reagan and former President Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, and celebrating two men with the words and music both love. President Reagan had a special relationship, both political and personal, with former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. The 78-year-old Lady Thatcher, in poor health after her stroke and against her doctor's wishes, flew from London to pay tribute and respects to her friend and compatriot in world leadership. Robin Oakley reports from London.
Margaret Thatcher greeted the death of President Ronald Reagan by declaring he was one of her closest political allies and dearest personal friends. He was the only world leader she used to kiss, and theirs was likely the most long-lasting and effective world leaders alliance of the 1980s. The great communicator in the White House, and the woman dubbed the Iron Lady by a Soviet Army newspaper, saw the world in stark black and white, not in any intervening shade of grey.
And really their thinking on many issues, not just the evils of communism, became very similar. Hatred of high taxes, hatred of big government, hatred of socialism in all its forms.
The so-called special relationship was probably stronger with Thatcher in Downing Street and Reagan in the White House than it's been since the days of Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill.
It is how much we have in common and the depth of our friendship that truly matters.
In her memoirs, which have 72 references to President Reagan in the index, she notes, "I knew that I was talking to someone who instinctively thought and felt as I did." And they didn't always agree. It was Thatcher who first persuaded Reagan that the Soviet Union's Mikhail Gorbachev was a man they could do business with. But when the two presidents met at Reykjavik and President Reagan nearly agreed to surrender most of the West's arsenal of arms, she dashed off to Washington to lecture him on his imprudence. And observers say she was furious when in 1983 the US invaded the Caribbean state of Grenada, a member of the British Commonwealth, without first warning the UK. Thatcher's increasing suspicion of Europe increased her eagerness to work with President Reagan.
I prefer a great alliance between the English-speaking peoples in America. It's that which saved liberty for the world.
It was an alliance which worked for two leaders successfully seeking to rebuild optimism in their countries. Margaret Thatcher was always ready to pay tribute to America and to the leadership of a president she saw as having played a major part in the defeat of communism.
You have in this century so often remained steadfast for what is right and against what is wrong.
And it was the way in which the special relationship worked in their time, perhaps, which in the end brought round a Europe initially suspicious of a president who worked as a Hollywood actor to appreciate his contribution to history. Robin Oakley, CNN, London.
This has been a week in which the nation's focus has been on remembrance of one of the greatest presidents of the past 100 years, Ronald Reagan. But we also lost another national treasure this week, Ray Charles. And tonight we leave you with a tribute to both men. Ray Charles performing America the Beautiful at President Reagan's second inaugural gala in 1985.